Okay, I'd like to bring this meeting to order. The Committee of the Whole of the Village of Villa Park. Clerk Konecki, please call the roll.
Yes, Trustee Salella.
Here.
Trustee Corkery. Trustee Kozar.
Here.
Trustee Kumar.
Here.
Trustee Murphy. Here. Trustee Patrick.
Here.
President Kazan.
Here. And will please stand. Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so this will be our first Committee of the Whole meeting, and so we'll kind of play it by ear. Hopefully everything goes smoothly. Our first discussion item is Tax Increment Financing Districts Overview. The board will be asked to consider extending and redefining the St. Charles TIF. And this discussion is meant to give you a background on the project and also an update on all TIF districts so far. So with that, we will turn it over.
Well, I'm just going to turn it immediately over to Patrick Burke, our
Okay.
Economic Development Director. So, sorry.
Okay, we will do that.
Go ahead, yes.
Yes.
Take it away.
So I'll be reviewing the 4 active TIF districts, and then also we're proposing creating another TIF district. So the first one is the North Avenue TIF, and as you can see, it extends from border to border and on both sides of North Avenue, north and south side. This TIF was created in 2006 and expires in 2029. The village did issue bonds on this TIF, and that was in order to assemble properties for redevelopment. A couple of examples are 325 East North Avenue and 257, 277 East North Avenue. That was the former Community Economic Development Office. And then the other one was the old Ladewig property that we had been sitting on for about 10 years. Just in the last couple of years, we sold both of those. And the developer who took the Ladewig property, he eventually built what's now Range USA there. Other projects that have occurred through the TIF is Pet Supplies Plus, and also Wildfire Harley-Davidson. Also, the former junkyard at North Avenue and Ardmore, staff is still hopeful that Casey's General Store is going to be starting that this fall, and that it'll open in the spring. Some of the future projects for this TIF district is the replacement of the salt dome. And then also there's a flooding issue in this area. We'll be constructing a regional stormwater detention basin behind the Burr Rabbit property. The second TIF that we'll be looking at is the St. Charles Road TIF. And there's really only about 2 blocks on St. Charles, but if you look at from Monterey heading west to Villa Avenue, and then it heads south down Villa Avenue to include the former AK mulch site. This TIF was created in 2009 and will expire in 2032. There's been very little activity in this TIF district until recently. The village bought the former AK mulch site and relocated them to 631 East Wildwood. And for the last couple of years, we've been meeting with a developer, Catalyst Partners. They've been looking for redevelopment sites. And when they learned that the village acquired this property, they submitted a proposal for a project called The Union. And it's a $50 million project that would have 220 rental units with commercial on the Villa Avenue side. And then there'd be a 2-story parking deck. And that parking deck would have 100 public parking spaces. So right now, it's being used for public parking, but if that project should go forward, there'll still be public parking on that site. And so, try to keep this this TIF in mind, the boundaries for it, because this will actually be part of the proposed TIF that we'll be talking about a little bit later. The third TIF is the Kenilworth TIF. That was created in 2014, and that'll expire in 2037. Kind of right in the middle is Lions Park, where the community recreation building will be going. And then there's also the biggest redevelopment project we've had right now is the Kenilworth Townhomes. That was 16 townhomes that were actually sold before they were all built. And the final 5 units were delivered in 2021 and occupied. A lot of the public improvements that you see in this area have actually been paid for by this TIF district, and that's a common use of TIF. For instance, the Cortese Park renovations, the depot renovation, the museum renovations, the improvements to the Great Western Trail and Illinois Prairie Path have all been funded through this TIF. And then there's also a facade program that's been very popular with the businesses in this area. So those are typical TIF programs and TIF expenses that you see in a TIF district. And then the fourth active TIF is the North Ardmore, Vermont TIF by the train station. Way to the far left is the Jefferson Pool. And then if you head east from there along Terrace up to Ardmore, going north to Vermont, that block on the right side, that's where Hawthorne Development has begun a project. And this TIF was also created in 2014 and will expire in 2037. And so there's been some iteration of EcoTerra Garden Station for many, many years, but it really wasn't until recently that Hawthorne Development really got it moving forward. Last year, the board approved intergovernmental agreements with School District 45 and 48. And then the planned unit development was approved in June of 2021. The redevelopment agreement was approved in August. And then Hawthorne Development closed on the property on September 30th. And this is going to be a $120 million project, about 350 units with commercial on the Ardmore side. And this is also going to have a 2-story parking deck. Demolition occurred this spring on that block. Hawthorne is currently building the Metro parking lot there. They're hoping to begin excavation next month with foundation and the walls going up by this winter. This slide, I wanted to show you the property tax revenue that each of these TIFs creates. And you can see the green, blue, and yellow lines. Those are the St. Charles TIF, the Kenilworth TIF, and the North Ardmore TIF. And those have shown very little activity since 2014. But with the Catalyst project, the Union, should be going in the next couple of years. Then also the Kenilworth townhomes just opening. And then with EcoTerra moving forward, we're expecting those 3 lines to start moving up, because the one that's been going up, that's TIF 3, that's the North Avenue one. So that's been generating a good tax increment revenue, which is really important because we did issue bonds for that. And so that is now paying for the debt service on those bonds. But it'll be interesting to see the next couple of years what those 3 flat lines are going to be doing as those projects get moving. And then Ovaltine Apartments, that was actually in a TIF district. It was created in 1996 and expired in 2019. And for those of you who were here back then, what the Ovaltine factory was, it was a vacant building. It was blighted. It was dilapidated. There were nuisance issues with it, and there was skepticism back then about what it could be. There were people saying, no one's going to live there. No one's going to pay those rents. And now look at it, it's 350 apartments. And it was the first major redevelopment in that area. And just to give you some idea of how successful it's been, in 1995, the equalized assessed value for that property was just under $700,000. Last year, it was $18.6 million. It increased 27 times. And so what that does for the taxing districts, in 1995, the village received about $8,000 in property tax for this. Last year, $215,000. School District 45, in 1995, received $24,000. This year, $640,000. School District 88, it was $14,000 in 1995. This year was $380,000. And that's not a one-time disbursement. That's going to be every year. So while it takes a long time, this is what TIFs do. They're supposed to attract investment to areas that are not receiving that investment. Ovaltine Apartments would never have occurred without the TIF. Same thing at the train station. Ecoterra could not have started without the TIF. Couldn't have started without the school districts participating in that. And so that's really a textbook example of what TIF should do for a community. Now, for the proposed TIF, so it's hard to see, but this proposed TIF includes all of the St. Charles TIF, but it's also including way on the right side or the east side, Rotary Park. And then we're extending it all down the St. Charles Road corridor. And there's a couple of reasons why we would like to create a new TIF. The Union project, the TIF it's in expires in 2032. So 10 years will not be enough. That project would not generate enough enough increment to really make it worthwhile. And then also, for the St. Charles Road corridor, along that whole corridor, everything that you're seeing in the Old Town area, we could do for the property owners on St. Charles Road. They could assemble properties so that they can do some sort of redevelopment. We could do streetscaping. We could do landscaping improvements. We could be doing public improvements. We could do a facade program. We could do signage. So there's a lot of advantages to expanding it to include all of St. Charles rather than just those 2 blocks. And then also Rotary Park, we wanted to include that. Right at Monterey and Wildwood, there's chronic flooding that occurs there. And this is a real long-term play, but as opportunities present themselves, we could increase the stormwater detention in that area by putting the TIF in there. So it'll take a long time for increment to generate, but that's just we wanted to have that option in case we could try to address it. And then it takes about 3 to 4 months to create a TIF district. And these aren't all the steps, but these are just some of the major steps that have to occur to create a TIF. The board would have to adopt a resolution to begin the process. That could start at the next meeting, September 26th. The village would have to publish a notice for the interested parties registry. And then also there'd be a notice of availability of the eligibility report and redevelopment plan. Our consultant, Tesca Associates, is working on that report and plan right now. The board would have to adopt an ordinance setting a date and time for the public hearing and the joint review board meeting. The joint review board consists of members of each of the taxing districts that's affected by the new TIF. They would meet, they would discuss the proposal, and then they would send their recommendation to the board. So the joint review board would meet, there'd be a public hearing, and the board would also have to terminate the existing TIF district and then adopt the 3 ordinances approving the new TIF district. So that's all things TIF, Villa Park.
So our goal was to then open it up for discussion. To open it up for discussion and comment from the board. And just to follow up on that last slide, Mr. Burke, what's the timeline on that last step to adopt the 3 ordinances to establish a new St. Charles corridor, commercial corridor TIF, assuming interest by the board?
It could, like the final step,
Yeah.
that it could happen in January.
Okay. So that's the timeline we're looking at.
It's a good point. I'm very much in favor of this. Is there much of a problem closing out the old TIF and then bringing that into this new TIF? And I imagine whatever monies are in there just get forwarded into that new TIF. But is there a lot of regulatory issues that go with that?
No, it's essentially a resolution or ordinance to terminate the existing TIF.
Anyone else on the board? Trustee Kumar?
I'm actually very much in favor of the St. Charles TIF. I think that area is blighted, needs development, certainly upgrades, and that would help development on that particular corridor. So I am in favor of that particular TIF.
Trustee Corkery?
I'd also like to see a lot more development around St. Charles. So I just had one question. When you say streetscaping, like a road diet or more like pedestrian friendly infrastructure, would that be something that might be included in that we'd be able to bring forward if this TIF goes forward?
Correct. That would be considered a public improvement, and that's a TIF eligible expense.
That's something I'd really like to see. So I too would like to see this go forward.
Anyone else? Any questions or comments?
Just we also have Brian Bow here from Storino, Romello, and Durkin, particularly because this is an area of his expertise, if you have any questions about TIF generally.
Trustee Kumar?
It looks like our TIFs are currently doing pretty well, especially North Avenue, and we've got a lot of growth coming in the future in many of the other TIFs. And I think opening up the TIF on St. Charles is probably also going to fill spots that are very, very empty right now, so that will be good. So that TIF money, you're saying, could be used eventually in Rotary Park and any kind of public improvement all along St. Charles, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, it does take
Time.
years just for increment to accrue naturally. It's usually a large project that spikes, and that's why you were seeing those lines were flat, and those 3 districts. The natural growth there really hasn't been much because there haven't been any major projects until recently.
Any other questions or comments?
Well, it used to be that the North Avenue TIF was always complained about, and that seems to be the one showing a lot of positive progress. So it kind of just tells you, wait and be patient.
Yeah, and that North Avenue TIF was a difficult one because there were bonds sold back then, which, you know, we have to pay off, so that, the other TIFs, I think it's just the money that's been generated has been used instead of, you know, buying the bonds on there. Okay. Darlene, anything else?
I think you got a question on there.
Just goes there.
So from a mechanical standpoint, if you set up the TIF or any of these TIFs, if property owners are within that TIF, can they just come to either the board or manager's office and say, hey, I want money for XYZ, which is a unallowable use under the TIF? Or is it a program that the village has to set up, like the facade program, for example? So the village would then set up and say, all right, we're going to utilize TIF money for facades. So anybody who wants facade improvement, come to us, fill out the application and so forth. Or are all the allowable uses under TIF available for property owners? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, so it depends if, again, how much increment there is in a TIF district. Like for the facade program, you know, there's enough money being generated that, you know, we can already budget, say, $40,000 for it. But if someone came to us, and they could access it that year, if someone came to us and said, I want to do this on my property, the way it usually works is it's pay as you go, in that you would get increment that your project generates over time.
So if I could add and start throwing things at me if I get some of this wrong, but we have an established program that was developed for the Kenilworth TIF, and we've been applying that to other TIF districts. So if you want to come up with a specific policy on how to apply those funds for the St. Charles TIF district, that would definitely be something we want to look at during that process. And then I guess the question I guess I'd ask Brian is, if we say these are the things we're going to do with money in this TIF by policy, and then we give money out for something that's in the universe of things that are legally, that we can legally do in a TIF district, but not in a policy, and I guess it depends upon if it's established by ordinance. What kind of risk or what kind of...
Well, I'm not familiar with the village's TIF policy to the extent that it has one that applies to all TIF districts versus just the Kenilworth. There's many communities that do adopt TIF policies that extend to all their TIFs. There's other communities that don't do that. You know, it's always difficult when you're drafting a policy to try to foresee what's going to happen, you know, 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And there's always that concern that you're going to leave something out of the policy that then somebody's going to come in and say, hey, I have this great project. And then you look at your policy and say, well, unfortunately, under our policy, it doesn't qualify. Now, that being said, you could always go back and amend your policy or include, you know, enough qualifying language that would give the board the discretion to look at individual projects separate and apart from the policy. But keep in mind that every TIF that's established, one of the things that Tesco's working on right now is what's called redevelopment plan. And the redevelopment plan will lay out what goals and objectives are for the village for that particular district. And to the extent that a property owner has a project that they want to do, they certainly come in and propose it to the village, and the village can consider it. It's under no obligation to move forward, even if it matches the goals and objectives in the TIF plan. And each one of those projects is done on a case-by-case basis. And as to what Patrick alluded to, you know, the best way to do it is the property owner comes and says, well, I have a project. You know, their property has to, through the TIF, has to fund the amount of TIF assistance they're requesting. So you're not siphoning these off of increments being generated by other parcels, because you want to retain that for your public improvements, your streetscape, your stormwater management, like that.
Yeah, so, just that last sentence, I want to make sure, so if you're, I mean, it's not one-to-one, if this property generates X amount of increment, that you are then obligated to put that much increment directly back to that property.
No,
Yeah,
if they come forward with a project that's going to generate, and just pull a number up, $500,000 for increment over 20 years, you could say, okay, well, we're going to give you $100,000 towards the project.
but you shouldn't be spending more on that project, than that project's increment.
Correct. You know, in everything, there's no absolutes.
Right.
So there's occasionally, you know, there could be some blockbuster deal that comes in. You know, developers like, hey, this is going to jumpstart this entire area, but guess it's not going to generate enough increment for me to be able to do the deal. And then you look and see, like, okay, well, are we willing to, you know, put in monies that are increment generated by other parcels? Again, it's just on a case-by-case basis. But that's the exception rather than the rule.
Okay. Question? Trustee Murphy?
Yes, can I get a copy of the recorded pages?
Oh, sure.
Super.
Thank
So that we'll get that to everybody.
Okay. Ms. Kumar?
So to piggyback on, he said, so basically for a private entity to use those funds, they have to be able to generate their own TIF revenue through their own property. Whatever they put in, basically the bank into the TIF is what they can take out if it's a private entity. But if it's a streetscape or some kind of public project, then we kind of assess that at a village level, and then have a process, whatever the sidewalks, the public improvements, we assess that at a village level and have it built in to kind of the development plan of a particular TIF. Is that what we're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
But just keep in mind, any project where you're going to be paying out increment to some developer or some construction for whatever, all of those decisions ultimately rest with the village board. And then also, just to clarify, somebody can't come to the village and say, well, this is what I'm proposing to do, and I want this money, unless they are incurring TIF eligible expenses. For instance, if they came in and said, well, I want to build a new building, and I have some TIF revenue, you can't, because new construction is not a TIF eligible expense. So, and that's something staff would work on with the developer to see, you know, when they come in with their proposed project, you know, first thing we ask is like, wow, it looks great. What are your TIF eligible expenses? Where's your budget? Why do you need this money? Because they have to justify to the village that they actually need this incentive. TIF is not just to make developers, you know, increase their bottom line. It's to equalize their bottom line, because the whole premise of TIF is that the project wouldn't get done but for, you know, TIF incentives. That it's, you know, whatever the reason. Property assemblage is, you know, too expensive. There's all kinds of hazardous wastes on the property. There's extraordinary expenses that have to be included by the developer before the village would say, okay, well, you know, we're willing to talk with you about this. So.
And perhaps two examples in the Kenilworth Townhomes redevelopment agreement. They're going to be receiving 50% of the increment they generate up to a certain amount. And Ecoterra, they'll be receiving 70% up to a certain amount. Just on their project, not on the entire TIF.
And that's part of those redevelopment agreements that we work out before the development starts, like we're doing with
Yes. Yep.
Ville Avenue.
And the Ecoterra, I'm sorry, I was going to say something that was, I was getting Ecoterra and Union mixed in my mind, so I'm going to stop right there.
Trustee Murphy?
So do we need to get consensus to move forward with adopting a resolution at the next meeting?
Our plan was to bring it to you, but if you want to make a sort of a consensus.
Well, just to back up a little bit, back in January, the board actually approved a resolution to retain Tesco to start working on this new St. Charles Road, St. Charles Corridor TIF district. And right now, the resolution was drafted rather tightly, and now the village is looking to expand the boundaries of the proposed TIF district. So what staff is working on is coming back to you with a resolution to amend the TESCA resolution to include this additional study area. And that's what will be before you, hopefully, at the next meeting. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Director Burke. Appreciate your time. Okay, so we will now move on to item 3B, is a review of mixed use, which are MX districts. Dr. Reed?
Sure. Either way. In 2018, the village adopted a revised zoning code, which is Appendix C of the Basic Zoning Code, which included a change in Article 4 to add mixed use, or MX districts. At the request of the village board, we will review these MX districts. The most recent Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation for changes to the zoning code include, or text amendments, include one change to the MXT district. This discussion will provide staff with direction and other potential changes for the Planning and Zoning Commission to review. So this basic overview of MX districts was one of the goals that you guys mentioned when we were putting together agenda for districts, and I will turn it over to Community Development Director Ellen Weber.
I am shorter than Patrick.
Many of us are.
Good evening. I did not prepare a PowerPoint for this. I did for the formal item on the agenda this evening. So there's one thing I wanted to impart is to begin to present an understanding of what these form-based codes are, because we tend to approach zoning from this traditional Euclidean, I've got to protect the health, safety, moral welfare of the community, and I'm going to do it by saying the building can be placed here this high, this dense, and set back in only these uses. And traditional zoning was based upon segregating uses. You didn't want a funeral home next to a residential property. These form-based codes evolved out of the transit-oriented development desire to have more compact, walkable communities. Because when you think, the interesting thing to me about having worked here in Villa Park is this town was basically platted in the 20s, and many look to the 20s to be the desire of what we should be in the world, with with people able to interact with their neighbors on their front porches and garages in the rear. And when you think of our older streets, you don't see this continual row of garages, because I've never worked in a town that had so many garages in the rear. So it's interesting that we were basically platted in the 20s, a high percentage of the community. And these TOD districts are trying to bring us back to that a little bit. For a while there, the trend was to do alleys and put garages in the back. But these form-based codes are all about how the building addresses the street. And so when you think about, I want to change what an MXT district looks like, you're not changing the district. There's a consideration that the form-based chapters, there's 6 form-based codes, there are 6 form-based districts in the code. And there are also 4 building types. And there's a variety of building types to be built in a variety of districts. So when you want to say, let's change this in the MXT, you're not changing MXT, you might be wanting to change what that building looks like. Does that make sense? And I think the best way I can illustrate it, and I will point out, we've got 2 members of our Planning and Zoning Commission with us, and I'm very appreciative of these gentlemen. They have made my time here wonderful. They've been very supportive. Jason Jarrett is our chairman. He's an AICP certified planner. Are you an architect too?
Architect by schooling, but not by life.
And Eric Lipke, right next to him, is a licensed architect. And these two, along with the other expertise on the commission, has just been exceptional. You have a phenomenal plan commission. You've got contractors on there. You've got just great knowledge. So where was I going with that? The Union. When the Union first came to us, that district, that parcel of land had been split into two districts, with MXR in the rear, thinking it was going to mimic the Kenilworth townhomes, and then an MX2. And they originally said, well, let's do an MXT project. And when we looked at it, they were going to do a general building and an MXT, but they were going to need like 14 variances. And just by taking it to MX2 with a storefront building, the number of variances halved. So when you look at the districts, you've got to look at the buildings more so even than the districts themselves. And in your packet, so here's the zoning map, and you can see these MXT districts are mainly St. Charles Road, and then the three, I'll call them these three secondary business districts, as the comprehensive plan calls them. You've got Ardmore, where am I at here?
It's along the metro, or the,
This is the metro lot, right, okay. So Ardmore North, and then you've got, this is 27 West Park, and then this is the old villa. And these are the four main areas. You know, when I asked Jack in Public Works to give me a map of all the MX, we didn't even have to look at the whole community, because everything's in the center of the community. It's not on North Avenue, and it's not on Roosevelt. It's in the center. I'm going to pop out of here for a second and go into, these were the exhibits that I provided for you. So here's the building types. And these were the two main charts that we looked at to go through these last projects before the village. And so this is a storefront building type. If you look at the memo that I gave you, on the first page I've referenced that there were 3 different projects we've reviewed in the last year. And each one has kind of indicated some minor conflicts in the code. It's actually very common, so don't panic. When you get into this much detail, it happens, and you just correct things as you move forward. And for example, this Union project, just changing the district, that what it did to the amount of variances was very significant. And the PZ 22006 begins to correct some of these minor conflicts. And then form-based zoning, I've already gone through here. There is, we can maybe talk about the purposes of each district. But I think my main goal tonight is to have you walk away with a better understanding of the interplay between the building types and the zoning code. Because when you look at Article 2, which is the traditional RS 7.5, the housing, it's got a minimum building setback. It tells you how far back, how tall. And the MX districts are, it'll differ whether you are, here's a, this is a storefront building, and you can see that it can be set, and it doesn't talk about a setback, it talks about a build to, wanting to put that building up to the front. So see how it wants to be within 0 to 5 feet of the street. But then when I go down to the next table, which is for the general building, it wants it to be 5 to 10. So for each of the building types, there is these tables here, and they're basically the same, but they're not 100% apples to apples. But see, this general building is 5 to 10 feet back. And if you're in an MXR2 with a general building, you're 10 to 20, you know, if you had an all-residential building. So the form-based code says it's trying to get that building as close to the street as possible. If you go back to the memo, you'll see at the bottom of page 3 that within each district, there are different building types permitted. I'm going to put that up on the screen for our audience here real quick.
get a crash course in form-based zoning all in on one night.
I will tell you, this is the first time I've worked in a form-based code. I'm very candid and honest about it, and it's been a challenge. It's taken me these 7 months, and it's starting to really kind of sink in. Jason has actually more experience with it than I do. So here is the building types, and you can see that in MX3, this is where we were at 24 East St. Charles. They did a storefront building. The general building was not available to them because along St. Charles, the code is saying push everything as close to the street as possible, at the same time that it's requesting a 13-foot streetscape. And that's where our conflicts are coming in. But the streetscape is what's going to create the character. And in the MXT, which was 27 West Park, only the general building was available. In MX2, which is where we looked at the Union, again, it was a storefront pushing it up to the street. When they first came in and they were looking at MXT, they needed a variance for their zero lot line. Once they went to storefront, that was one of the variances that went away. Does that make sense?
But what that tells me is in this code, there are a lot of anomalies that need to be fixed. Am I correct? No.
No, that's really not accurate.
Okay.
MX districts are, the intent of the MX district is to either create a specific building, a vision of what the buildings are like, more so than what the specific uses are, if that makes sense. It's more that the best way to it's hard to explain in a few words. But if you think of our former chairman, Robin Whitehurst, one of his concerns was that under the zoning ordinance we had previously, if a building on Villa Avenue or Park burned down, under the zoning ordinance that existed, you couldn't build anything even vaguely like that. You'd have to have a lot of parking, it would have to be in front. So you'd wind up with like the 7-Eleven look, or you know what I mean? Like where you've got a parking lot in front with a building back, maybe 1 or 2 stories, but you couldn't rebuild what was there. The MX districts were kind of created to both try to preserve what is existing, but also in areas along St. Charles, reinforce a potential vision of what we would want. Because I think most of us would look at the types of development along St. Charles, as the St. Charles TIF discussion earlier leads to, and think, without singling any specific uses, are large parking lots full of vehicles what the long-term future for St. Charles is? Or is it a pedestrian, cycling, friendly street that also allows for vehicular traffic with buildings like the way St. Charles was before the early 1980s when it was widened? I mean, St. Charles was essentially 3 lanes until it was widened in the 80s. And if you look along there, you can see the remnants of that, where you have buildings set up to the sidewalk, but those sidewalks in those grass areas used to be wider.
So it's kind of like putting the parking in the back and keeping the storefront front, which is kind of the
They push the parking to the rear.
rear, and then they move it forward. It's just kind of a reshaping of that same area.
Right.
A lot of this, yeah, okay.
And an example of something that came up on 27 West Park was, why do you not want your entrance to your parking on Park? The example of why you don't is the Villa Medical Building on Villa Avenue, which is a upside down U-shaped building with a hole punched in the part where you want people to feel comfortable walking. There's no street frontage there, so to the degree possible, you would want that on the rear. We don't have a lot of alleys, so that brings things onto the side. Are there some places where the code could be clarified with some specific projects? Possibly. But the complexity comes with trying to zone for a vision as opposed to the more, the Euclidean, which was, we're going to tell you what you can build and roughly what bulk it can be. Beyond that, you can do whatever you want. So there are even things in the design guidelines in MX districts that don't exist in other areas where you get into things like roof types on buildings. What buildings can have flat roofs? What buildings can have pitched roofs?
Blank walls.
What percentage of blank wall, what percentage of transparency you need at the ground level. General ideas of engaging corners with entrances when you're on, in corner features when you're on a corner. So.
And back to the medical center with that drive-through in the middle, that's a basic downtown tenant that as you're walking down the street, at a certain point, if you don't see more stores ahead, you stop. So you want to have as many teeth in the block as you can, each tooth being a building. You don't want to have the holes in the middle. That's an old, just urban design philosophy.
And, another example of where pushing things back too far in urban areas like that is, even part of Ovaltine, because the office, the commercial space on Ovaltine is pushed back several feet from the frontage because of the old ordinance and the fear that having buildings too close was bad. But those spaces are largely occupied by daycares and real estate offices and people who don't need their windows on the street. So, is the code perfect at the moment? No, there are probably areas that could be improved. But zoning ordinances are always evolving.
And one of the things that Chairman Jarrett brought out during the 27 West Park discussion was his background on what the old code would have allowed there. It would have allowed a building to be 4 stories high, 50% lot coverage, 50% building, 50% parking. And so these form-based codes are allowing us to create that streetscape and that walkability in the front that the old code did not do for us.
Right. Yes, 27 West Park could have been 5 stories under the old zoning ordinance. Could have been roughly the same floor area ratio, and they could have put the building in the back and put a surface parking lot in the front on Park Avenue with an exit on Princeton by code. And the form-based zoning is trying to eliminate some of those things that are detrimental to the feel of a neighborhood.
So what I'd like to be able to walk away with tonight is answer any questions you might have on how a form-based code answers, if I can in this short time frame. And also, if there's any things you'd like the commission to look at moving forward. They've already identified that they do believe a 4 to 5 story height is appropriate in an MX building, but not all of the MX zoned properties should necessarily be MX zoned, in MXT. In 2018, when the code was done, there were some significant rezonings and an attempt was made to limit nonconformities. And I'll let Jason address that. But not every parcel maybe should be MXT, which is the red on the map up here.
Yeah, that is true. There, with the zoning map and zoning ordinance update, the desire at that time by, I think, certainly elected officials, but to make the ordinance be as in character with the comprehensive plan as possible, but to a certain degree try to limit the amount of nonconformities that were created, because when you create new zoning ordinance, new zoning text, and new map overlays where you're changing and creating new zoning districts, you can make a property nonconforming to the point that if the building burned down, they couldn't do what they were doing before, or if they want to do an addition to a building, they may not be able to, or the use that they're currently carrying forward might be grandfathered, going forward, but is now, like if they were to cease doing business, couldn't be started up again. And so there was some thought put into not creating too many of those situations. You can't avoid them all, except for in areas where you really know what is there is not what the long-term vision should be.
Okay, so the choice of why something is MXT versus MX1 or MXR1, how was that chosen?
Now, I'm going to point right here to the Union. You can see this is it right here. And the rear was MXR2, thinking it was going to come back to what the townhomes were. And then you were going to MXT it as a transition. And when they realized it should be MX2, which is this and this, it was a better solution because this and this have 0 lot lines. So you then just continued the street face right at the property line. But it was, the decisions was made based on what was there now largely, correct?
Yeah, generally speaking, the consultants tried to take the zoning designations we had and apply them to existing uses. And there were areas that we highlighted where we said, well, that's, what is there now definitely isn't what we would like to see in the future. So the fact that that creates a nonconformity. But the MX districts specifically were to be used in areas, you really have the 3 nodes. So you have Ardmore and Villa, South Ardmore and Villa, which were areas where we wanted to try to maintain the character that was there. You had the TOD area around the train station, where that actually came from an earlier overlay district that was done several years before to try to bring in projects like the Garden Station before we were able to update the entire zoning ordinance. And so that was creating a vision of what we wanted that area to be like. And then along with St. Charles was the same thing. So really you're looking at, what are the existing uses, but also what do you want it to be in the future? So, there are nodes along St. Charles zoned MXT. Are the uses that are there now currently kind of uses you would see in MXT? No, because you hope something more develops there.
So as we develop the TIF district on St. Charles, where are we going to rezone that area? It should probably be rezoned to assess what we want there, correct?
If I had my, the village is at a point where an updated comprehensive plan, if not a new comprehensive plan, is something that probably needs to be undertaken, especially with projects like Garden Station, the Union, and some of these larger projects that while they were the pie in the sky projects when the comprehensive plan was drafted almost 15 years ago. And I would think that wholesale changes to the MX districts and the zoning districts map-wide would be something that you would want to have the information that comes from that comprehensive plan to then move forward with that. And I'll say this here real quick. We're the Planning and Zoning Commission. I say this at almost every hearing. But we combine a plan commission with a zoning board of appeals. And we basically have been serving for the last several years as a zoning board of appeals. And I'd like to see a lot more planning.
A lot more
Before the Plan
long-range
Commission.
planning, yeah.
Both long-range and short plan. I mean, I think there are some short-range projects that, where,
Yeah, so my personal opinion is not jump on changing everything in the zoning until we get a comprehensive plan.
That was actually in this year's budget.
Yeah.
And so we're waiting now. One of the things was to hire a village manager, and we're very close to hiring a community development director. Don't worry, Patrick. Your job's good. So at that point, that would be one of the things that we would want to do is to follow the Board of Trustees desire to update that plan as,
Yeah.
as Commissioner Jarrett,
And-
Chairman Jarrett was saying.
And just to be clear on the process, when the comprehensive plan was undertaken, I can't tell you exactly how long that went out, but I'd be willing to bet it was a year or more. And I know there was a lot of community outreach. We had public, not just public hearings like before the Plan Commission, but we had public workshops where the community was invited out to do, like, what heights of buildings do you envision here? What styles of buildings? Shown pictures of other communities, sometimes really basic A to B. Do you like this or do you like this? Which of these do you prefer?
It's like going to the eye doctor.
Yes, exactly. No, it's like, do you like this tall modern building with balconies, or do you like this, Tudor building that's 2 stories tall? And you take those and then you try to take the goals of the vision of the village and what the village wants and what the future, and combine those into the plan. But all that was done with the zoning update as well. I mean, there were, I can't even tell you how many dozens and dozens of meetings there were, and then also public workshops with that as well.
But as you rightfully said right now, it's been quite a few years, so.
On a comprehensive plan, yes.
Yeah, and with changes in TIF districts and changes in, current residents and so on and so forth, and that kind of thought, that vision is gonna change, and we really need.
The comprehensive plan is,
It's not so much that there are these mixed districts, I don't think that's the problem at all. I think it's more, where do we put which district, how do we cite it so that, the people of Villa
plan-
Park are happy.
Yeah, the comprehensive plan is that global view, and
Yeah.
it says there's going to be industrial here or housing here. Zoning drills down to what type of industrial or what type of housing, and we do agree. Our recommendation is that the comp plan happen first before you really start changing these districts. Consuelo Arguelles had the RFP written for the comp plan last December, and the project just wasn't executed based on changes.
and the comprehensive plan was, to give you an idea of how old it is, it's one of the first things I approved as part of the Zoning Board of Appeals. So, 2008, I think.
And thank you for doing that, certainly, because at least there was a plan. But we certainly probably need an update.
Well, it was a lot more, that wasn't all just me. I came along at the right time with that one. I
Jason,
can answer any specific questions.
All right, go ahead. All right, I'll go. I think one of the things, especially with 27 West Park that was coming up, is the way these MXT districts are kind of interspersed in the other districts. And since it is a transition, and I think a lot of the residents were concerned, in a transition, going from, your commercial into the residential, should you have a 5-story building in an MXT district?
Well, I think that depends. As an example, the MXT district allows a 5-story building.
Right.
But it requires the floors above the 3rd floor to be set back.
Right.
Where the MX2, the MX3, the MX1, they don't.
Yeah.
It allows transitional building types, I believe, like it allows, I believe, row buildings, which the MX1, MX2, and MX3 don't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a developer may not choose to build a row building, but it's an option that doesn't exist in other areas. But yeah, so that's the problem with transitions, right?
Yeah, right.
Because you're not always transitioning from the same thing to you could be transitioning from commercial to single-family residential, or commercial to industrial, or commercial to multifamily residential, and yeah.
Okay, well, discussion for down the road.
Yeah.
Thanks. Anyone else? Questions?
President Kazan, can I just point out too, the MXT is actually zoned office residential district. And so the vision, when it was first written, was that those would be the 2 primary uses. In their discussions, the commission feels that first floor residential should be a special use.
Yes.
And that's in the recommendation from PZ 2206.
Yeah, just to clarify on that just a little bit. the current code allows a mix of residential and other uses on the ground floor in MXT. The reason we felt it should be a special use is because a lot of the transitional districts would either benefit from little or no residential on the ground floor, say in MXT along St. Charles, where, say, just to use 27 West Park again, or the one on the east end of Ardmore that's currently the single-story courtyard that wraps around the
Right here.
parking lot. A development there, residential adjacent to the residential might be appropriate, but you may also want that commercial use on the end of the building that abuts the other commercial uses. But generally speaking, in commercial areas, ground floor residential uses are, they're wall, I mean, they break up the space. Like, you know, if you've been in a commercial part of anywhere where you're like store, and then it's a bunch of residential lobbies, it's not really the same. Or a bunch of, you don't see them a lot even in Chicago because they don't generally want residential on the ground floor, but where you've got, you know, little front yard behind fences in the middle of a commercial district. It's not really what you want. A special use is also a much lower bar for an applicant to clear than variations. They basically, it's the health, safety, welfare, essentially, is the bar they have to clear versus, you know, hardship and all of that.
And an interesting thing on these storefront buildings, the first floor is commercial only. So a lot of the older districts, like when I worked for the city of Geneva, they had a district that was first floor retail only. And that's how I viewed this storefront. So if you're going to take the transition as wanting to create a transition, but also make strengthen your business district, that's where they're coming from, to take the residential off the first floor, unless it's just not feasible. So that's why they put it as special use. Sometimes commercial is not feasible.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Okay, we have any public comments tonight? Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Owen. Appreciate that.
My name is Sue Muse Sereno. I'm at 427 South Yale. And thank you, everybody. You've given me some really good information. I do have just a couple of questions or comments from everything I've heard tonight. And I think the TIF for the St. Charles Road corridor is a great idea. A couple of, I guess, concerns I would have, and I'm thinking of it as I compare it to St. Charles Road in Lombard along their Main Street, you know, that corridor, St. Charles Road, where it's only not 2 lanes, it's only 1 lane, and the speed limit is 25 miles per hour. So you have the storefronts, you're trying to get more businesses in, and you want to have that foot traffic. I just want to bring that up as I guess a safety concern as you move forward with that. And then the second thing is, you know, I think Jason maybe answered the question about this going back to 27 West Park Boulevard and for that MXT and a special use permit. It sounds like that's just an easy hurdle to overcome, and I'm wondering if we could rezone that area of that district in the future, because that doesn't make sense then if you're trying to make it retail or commercial use to then have instead this special permit. So those are my thoughts. I've got to collect myself a little bit more, but thank you very much. I do appreciate all your time and effort, and I know that's a big job you guys have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sue.
Patrice Gallagher, 36 South Monterey. Again, thanks everyone.
I'm sorry, can you say your name again more slowly?
Patrice Gallagher,
Gallagher?
36 South
Thank you.
Monterey. Yeah. I have some questions, but I can maybe ask them at another time. I do have wondering, Jason said, you know, the goals of the village for a comprehensive plan and then, you know, community input. I'd like to know, I don't have to know now, well, who decides the goals? How do you choose the goals? And then the other concern I have is how do existing businesses fit into the new zoning, like the MXT in 2018? I personally know of a business on St. Charles that was impacted very negatively when the zoning was changed, and it impacted me because I interacted with that business. And it was discussed, you know, it's an industrial corridor, we want it to look better, and there are a lot of vehicles, and I'm wanting to know, how do those businesses, how are they impacted with the new vision of what you discussed tonight?
Well, typically on a zoning change, if a business is operating in there and if they stay the same, the zoning change will not affect them. It's when either they sell the business or, you know, like Jason had said, if the building burns down and then they have to reconstruct it, then they have to meet the new zoning. But if the business is there and the zoning changes or anything changes, then they're grandfathered in until there's a major change to
And
their
so to
property.
that point, with the vision of that form, I love the idea of the form zoning, with that vision of, you know, beautification and pedestrian friendly, when there's all these businesses with vehicles, I'm not understanding how that's gonna fit, but hopefully it'll
Well, yeah,
work.
there'll be long discussions.
Thank you.
in there. Thank you. Okay. Seeing anything else, I think we will adjourn our committee of the whole meeting. We will take a 5 or 6 minute break to allow our cable guys to get things going for the next meeting, and we'll probably adjourn the regular meeting around 7:15. Good, thank you. Hold on.